You really think you deserve this house? My brother scoffed across the courtroom. His voice wasn't just loud, it was confident, like the verdict had already been stamped and filed. You barely paid rent your whole life. His lawyer adjusted his tie and added, "She was staying there out of pity, Your Honor. My client has been financially independent since he was 22. A few people behind us chuckled softly. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't move. I didn't look down. I didn't fold. Then Robert leaned back in his chair and said it, "She's got nothing to stand on." The judge adjusted her glasses and stared at both of us for a long moment. The courtroom went quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioner. "We'll see about that," she said. And then she lifted a thick envelope no one else in the room had seen. "My name is Rachel Dawson, and I'm 34 years old. I teach high school English at Westbrook High. Nothing flashy. I spend my days explaining symbolism to teenagers who swear they hate reading, grading essays at my kitchen table, and coaching debate after school until my voice is shot. My paycheck covers the basics: mortgage, utilities, groceries. Nothing extra, nothing glamorous. In my family, that made me the quiet one, the unimpressive one. Robert, my older brother, is 38, real estate broker, owns 2 rental properties, drives a black SUV that looks like it belongs in a commercial. He speaks in bullet points and numbers, cap rates, equity, appreciation. At family dinners, he'd lean back and say, "It's all about leverage," and everyone would nod like he'd just delivered wisdom from the mountaintop. I'd mention helping one of my students get into college, and someone would say, "That's nice, Rachel." That was the rhythm of our lives. 3 years ago, when Grandma's health started slipping, I moved into her house. Robert called it convenient. I called it necessary. Grandma's arthritis had gotten bad. She'd drop plates because her fingers locked without warning. She'd forget if she'd taken her medication. Some nights she'd wake up confused and shuffle down the hallway, and I'd hear her slippers dragging softly against the wood floor. That house always smelled like lavender soap and old books. She kept the windows cracked even in winter because she liked fresh thinking air, as she called it. The kitchen cabinets were slightly crooked, and the clock above the stove ticked louder than it should have. At night, when everything else was silent, that ticking felt huge. I handled her meds, I drove her to doctor appointments that smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. I cooked bland, heart-healthy dinners she pretended to enjoy. I helped her bathe when the arthritis flared so badly she couldn't lift her arms. Robert visited on holidays. He'd show up with expensive pastries and say, "How's our girl doing?" like he was checking in on a client. Grandma always smiled when she saw him. She loved him. She loved us both. But love doesn't erase reality. The last winter before she passed, I slept lightly every night because her breathing had changed. It was shallow, uneven. I'd lie there listening through the thin hallway walls, counting the seconds between breaths. One night, she grabbed my wrist and said, "You don't have to give up your life for me." I smiled and said, "I'm not giving it up. I'm just rearranging it." She squeezed my hand. "People show their true colors when money gets involved," she whispered. I didn't know then how right she was. When she passed, the house went still in a way that felt unnatural. No oxygen machine hum, no kettle whistling, no slow shuffle of slippers, just silence. The funeral was packed. Robert stood at the front in a tailored black suit and delivered a speech about legacy and strength. He cried on cue. People hugged him longer than they hugged me. 2 weeks later, I was grading essays at the dining table when there was a knock at the door. A man in a gray jacket handed me a stack of papers. Petition to sell estate property. Filed by Robert Dawson. My hands went cold. According to the documents, the house belonged to the estate and needed to be liquidated and divided. He claimed there was no formal will, just verbal wishes. I called him immediately. "What is this?" I asked. "It's business," he said casually. "We need to settle assets." "I live here," I said. "You stayed there," he corrected. "That's different." I felt something crack inside my chest. Grandma wanted me here. "Did she put that in writing?" he asked. I didn't answer. At Sunday lunch that week, he made it public. "Rachel's going to have to start apartment hunting," he said loudly while passing the potatoes. "Market's still decent for renters." My aunt looked at me with tight lips. "You'll figure it out, honey." I said, "Grandma wanted me to stay." Robert laughed, actually laughed. "Show us where it says that." No one defended me. That part hurt more than the lawsuit. Then came the whispers that I'd manipulated Grandma, that I'd isolated her, that I'd played the long game. Played the long game, like sitting in hospital waiting rooms at 7 a.m. was some master strategy, like cooking low-sodium soup was a chess move. In court filings, his lawyer described me as financially unstable, dependent, overly emotional. Robert told the judge, "She doesn't even make enough to maintain the property." I wanted to shout that I had already been maintaining it, fixing gutters, replacing plumbing, paying bills, but I stayed quiet. Because Grandma had once told me something else. She never argue with someone who thinks volume equals truth. Let the facts talk. A month before she died, she had asked me to drive her downtown to her longtime attorney, Mr. Halpern. The office smelled like paper and old leather. I remember the ticking of a wall clock in the lobby. I sat there scrolling through lesson plans while she met with him privately. When she came out, she looked tired but steady. That night, she handed me a small sealed envelope. "In case of dispute," she said, "give this to Mr. Halpern." I didn't open it. I put it in my desk drawer and forgot about it. Maybe I didn't forget. Maybe I just didn't think I'd need it. I was wrong. After Robert filed the petition, he didn't stop there. One afternoon, I came home from work and saw his truck parked in the detached garage. The lock had been changed. I called him. "You can't just change the locks," he said. "It's part of the property, technically shared until this is resolved." I didn't even ask. I don't need to ask. I stood there staring at the new metal lock, feeling like a stranger outside my own space. A week later, at a family barbecue, he clinked his drink and said, "Maybe Rachel can start charging admission for her grief tour house." A few cousins laughed awkwardly. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection. My eyes looked tired, older. That night, I started documenting everything. Screenshots of texts, emails, voicemails, including the ones he had sent Grandma months earlier. Maybe we should transfer the deed early to simplify things. You won't need the house much longer, anyway. At the time, I'd brushed those off as insensitive. Now they sounded calculated. Then Robert offered me a settlement, $20,000. "Take it and walk away," he said over coffee, like he was doing me a favor. "Court fees will eat you alive." I nodded slowly. "I'll think about it," I said. I didn't sign anything. Instead, the next morning, I took that sealed envelope out of my desk drawer and drove downtown to Mr. Halpern's office. When I handed it to him, he looked at my last name on his appointment sheet and sighed softly. "I was wondering when this would happen," he said. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a short handwritten note from Grandma. It read, "In case of dispute, refer to updated will dated March 12th. Rachel has full knowledge of my intentions." Mr. Halpern looked at me over his glasses. "She anticipated conflict," he said. My heartbeat steadied for the first time in weeks. Robert thought there was no will. He was wrong.
Mr. Halpern did not rush. That was the first thing I noticed. While Robert posted photos online about expanding the portfolio and hinted to cousins about future renovations, Mr. Halpern moved slowly, deliberately, like a man placing stones in a foundation. He invited me into his office 2 days after I brought the note. The shelves behind him were lined with binders, each labeled by year. The room smelled faintly of ink and dust. He pulled out a thick file and placed it on the desk between us. "She updated her will 3 months before she passed," he said. 27 pages, witnessed, notarized, supported by medical evaluations confirming competency. I blinked. Medical evaluations? She insisted on them, he replied. 2 separate physicians, both signed statements confirming she was of sound mind. My chest tightened. Grandma had seen this coming. She had prepared for war while I was just trying to get her to eat more than half a bowl of soup. There's also a non-contest clause, he added. What does that mean? It means if a beneficiary challenges the will and loses, they forfeit what they were originally set to inherit. My breath caught. Robert doesn't know about this, I said. Mr. Halpern's mouth twitched slightly. No, he does not. For the first time since the papers had been served, I felt something other than dread. I felt steady. Still, Robert kept pushing. He started telling relatives I had isolated Grandma near the end, said I controlled her visitors, that I filtered her calls. One evening, my aunt called me. "Rachel, honey," she began carefully, "Robert mentioned you didn't always let people see her." "That's not true," I said quietly. "She was exhausted. Sometimes she didn't want company." "Well, people are talking." People are talking. That phrase stung more than the accusation itself. Robert escalated again when he filed a motion requesting temporary access to all property structures, including the garage and basement storage. He framed it as asset inspection. It felt like intrusion. One Saturday morning, I walked into the backyard and saw him measuring the fence line with a tape measure. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Assessing," he said without looking up. "If we sell, buyers will ask about lot boundaries. We're not selling." He finally looked at me, eyes flat. "You don't get to decide that." The audacity of him standing in Grandma's garden where she used to grow tomatoes every summer, speaking like it was already his, made my hands shake. But I didn't yell. I took photos. I documented the dates. I forwarded everything to Mr. Halpern. Robert tried one more tactic. He showed up at my school. I was in my classroom after hours grading essays when the secretary buzzed in. "Rachel, there's a man here asking for you." I stepped into the hallway and saw him leaning against the lockers like he owned the building. "We need to talk," he said. "This isn't the place. Then stop dragging this out." "I didn't drag anything out," I replied. He lowered his voice. "You can't afford this fight. Legal fees, maintenance, taxes, you'll drown." "I'm not drowning," he said. "You will." For a moment, I saw something beneath the arrogance. Not concern, not regret, impatience. He wanted control, clean and simple. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt heavy. The clock above the stove ticked louder than ever. I walked through the hallway and ran my hand along the wallpaper Grandma refused to replace for 20 years. People show their true colors when money gets involved. Her voice echoed in my memory. The next week, Mr. Halpern called. "The judge has scheduled the final hearing, and I filed everything." "Everything?" I asked. "Emails, voicemails, timeline of attempted property transfer requests, medical competency statements, the full will." My pulse quickened. "Is it solid?" I asked. "It's airtight." Robert, meanwhile, was celebrating prematurely. A cousin forwarded me a screenshot of his social media post. Big moves coming soon, expanding the family assets. Family assets. As if I wasn't family. As if caregiving didn't count as contribution. The morning of the hearing, I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection. I wore a navy blazer I usually saved for parent-teacher conferences. My hands trembled slightly while I buttoned it. I wasn't afraid of losing the house. I was afraid of losing the truth. In the courtroom, Robert arrived with polished confidence. Dark suit, expensive watch. He shook hands with his lawyer like they were about to close a deal. He didn't look at me at first. When he finally did, his expression was almost bored, like this was a formality. His lawyer opened with sharp efficiency. "My client believes there was undue influence during the decedent's final months. Miss Dawson resided in the property without formal lease agreement and benefited from proximity and control." Control, that word again. Robert took the stand and spoke smoothly.
My sister has always depended on family support, he said. She's emotional. She doesn't understand financial complexity. I was simply trying to ensure assets were handled responsibly. Handled responsibly. I stared at him, barely recognizing the person speaking. He painted me as unstable, as clingy, as someone who had attached herself to property she couldn't afford. Then he made the mistake. There was no formal will, he said confidently. The judge paused. I have received a sealed document submitted this morning, she said calmly. A what? His lawyer asked. The clerk approached with a thick envelope. I felt my heart in my throat. Robert shifted in his chair for the first time that morning. The judge broke the seal. Paper rustled. The sound seemed amplified in the silent room. She began to read. Page 1, Testamentary Declaration. Page 2, Statement of Mental Clarity supported by attached physician certifications. Robert's jaw tightened. Page after page detailed Grandma's reasoning, her care, her gratitude, her explicit acknowledgement of my role in her final years. Then the sentence came. I leave my primary residence in full to my granddaughter, Rachel Dawson. The air changed. I heard someone behind us inhale sharply. Robert's face lost color, but the judge continued. In the event that any beneficiary contests this will, that individual shall forfeit their designated monetary inheritance in full. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Robert looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the document again, flipping pages quickly. Mr. Halpern stood. Your Honor, we would also like to submit supporting exhibits. Emails, voicemails, timeline of attempted property transfer requests, medical competency statements, the full will. My pulse quickened. Robert, meanwhile, was celebrating prematurely. A cousin forwarded me a screenshot of his social media post. Big moves coming soon, expanding the family assets. Family assets. As if I wasn't family, as if caregiving didn't count as contribution. The morning of the hearing, I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection. I wore a navy blazer I usually saved for parent-teacher conferences. My hands trembled slightly while I buttoned it. I wasn't afraid of losing the house. I was afraid of losing the truth. In the courtroom, Robert arrived with polished confidence. Dark suit, expensive watch. He shook hands with his lawyer like they were about to close a deal. He didn't look at me at first. When he finally did, his expression was almost bored, like this was a formality. His lawyer opened with sharp efficiency. My client believes there was undue influence during the decedent's final months. Miss Dawson resided in the property without formal lease agreement and benefited from proximity and control. Control, that word again. Robert took the stand and spoke smoothly. My sister has always depended on family support, he said. She's emotional. She doesn't understand financial complexity. I was simply trying to ensure assets were handled responsibly. Handled responsibly. I stared at him, barely recognizing the person speaking. He painted me as unstable, as clingy, as someone who had attached herself to property she couldn't afford. Then he made the mistake. There was no formal will, he said confidently. The judge paused. I have received a sealed document submitted this morning, she said calmly. A what? His lawyer asked. The clerk approached with a thick envelope. I felt my heart in my throat. Robert shifted in his chair for the first time that morning. The judge broke the seal. Paper rustled. The sound seemed amplified in the silent room. She began to read. Page 1. Testamentary Declaration. Page 2, Statement of Mental Clarity supported by attached physician certifications. Robert's jaw tightened. Page after page detailed Grandma's reasoning, her care, her gratitude, her explicit acknowledgement of my role in her final years. Then the sentence came. I leave my primary residence in full to my granddaughter, Rachel Dawson. The air changed. I heard someone behind us inhale sharply. Robert's face lost color, but the judge continued. In the event that any beneficiary contests this will, that individual shall forfeit their designated monetary inheritance in full. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Robert looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the document again, flipping pages quickly. Mr. Halpern stood. "Your Honor, we would—"
The judge didn't deliberate long. She adjusted her glasses again, scanned the final page, and then looked directly at Robert. "This will is valid. It is supported by medical evaluations confirming competency. It contains a clear no-contest clause. The petitioner has challenged it and presented insufficient evidence of undue influence." Robert shifted in his seat. His confidence was gone now. No more relaxed posture, no more half-smirk. The judge continued, voice steady and firm. "The court upholds the will in full. The property located at 148 Willow Lane is awarded solely to Rachel Dawson." My name echoed in that courtroom in a way it never had before. Clear, official, final. "And," the judge added, "due to the activation of the no contest clause, the petitioner forfeits his designated inheritance." A sharp murmur moved through the gallery. Robert's lawyer leaned in quickly, whispering something urgent, but it didn't matter. The words had already been spoken. The decision had already landed. Robert stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he said under his breath. The judge didn't react. "We are adjourned." The gavel came down once, clean, decisive. And just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, the air felt colder than it had that morning. The sky was pale gray, the kind that makes everything look sharper. Family members stood in small clusters near the steps. The same people who had whispered about me, the same ones who had questioned my motives. No one met my eyes at first. Robert walked past me without speaking. His jaw was tight, his shoulders stiff. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked stunned. He paused near the bottom of the steps, like he might say something, an apology, a threat, anything. But he didn't. He just kept walking. I stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of 3 months lift off my chest. It wasn't joy, it wasn't triumph, it was steadiness. My aunt approached me carefully. "Well," she said, forcing a small smile, "I guess everything worked out." I held her gaze. "It worked out because Grandma planned it." She nodded, then looked away. No one congratulated me. No one apologized either. But the silence was different now. It wasn't heavy with doubt. It was heavy with realization. I walked to my car alone. When I got inside, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, replaying the sound of the judge's voice. Awarded solely to Rachel Dawson. For years, I had been the quiet one, the one who didn't argue at the table, the one who let comments slide, the one who was told she was too soft. Soft didn't mean weak. It meant I knew when to speak and when to wait. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every streetlight, every turn felt sharper somehow. When I pulled into the driveway, the house stood there exactly as it had that morning, unmoved, unshaken. The porch steps creaked as I walked up. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house smelled faintly like cinnamon. I had baked the night before, trying to calm my nerves. The scent lingered in the air, mixing with the familiar lavender from Grandma's old sachets tucked into drawers. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it. "It's done," I whispered. The clock above the stove ticked steadily, the same rhythm that had filled the silence during her last winter, the same rhythm that had kept me company through sleepless nights. I walked into the living room and ran my fingers along the arm of her favorite chair. The fabric was worn in the exact spot where her hand used to rest. For a moment, I let myself feel everything: the exhaustion, the relief, the sadness that she wasn't here to see it. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Robert. "This isn't over." I stared at the screen for a long second. Then I typed back, "It is." I didn't lock him. I didn't write anything else. There was nothing more to argue. The court had spoken. The documents had spoken. Facts don't bend just because someone is louder. Over the next few days, the energy around me shifted. Relatives who had kept their distance started reaching out casually. "We should grab coffee. No hard feelings, right?" I kept my responses polite but brief. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. At school, I didn't tell my students what had happened, but I noticed something in myself had changed. When one of my debate kids hesitated before presenting an argument, I said, "Don't shrink just because someone else is confident. Confidence isn't always truth." The words hit differently now. That weekend, I cleaned out the garage. Robert's truck was gone. The new lock he had installed hung there useless. I replaced it with one of my own, not out of spite, out of clarity. I found Grandma's old gardening tools in the corner, rusted but still sturdy. I carried them into the backyard and stood where her tomato plants used to grow. The soil was dry. I knelt down and pressed my hands into it anyway. The house wasn't just a structure. It was mornings making tea while she read the newspaper out loud. It was late nights listening to the hum of her oxygen machine. It was arguments about how much sugar was too much sugar in oatmeal. It was showing up. Robert had measured value in square footage and resale potential. Grandma had measured value in presence, and the will reflected that. A week later, an official letter arrived confirming the court's ruling and transfer documentation. Seeing my name printed there again made it real in a way the courtroom moment hadn't. This wasn't temporary. It wasn't borrowed. It was mine. Not because I fought the loudest, but because I stayed when it mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the kitchen walls gold, I sat at the dining table with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened. Robert had tried to paint me as dependent, unstable, manipulative, but the truth had been sitting in a sealed envelope the entire time, prepared, signed, witnessed. Grandma had trusted me enough to plan ahead. She had seen the possibility of conflict and decided to protect me from it. That wasn't favoritism. That was foresight. I don't know if Robert will ever admit he was wrong. I don't know if family dinners will ever feel normal again. But I do know this. When the pressure hit, I didn't break. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I gathered proof. I sought counsel. I let the truth unfold at the right time. And in the end, the same courtroom where I was called unstable became the place where my steadiness was confirmed. If someone in your life has ever tried to rewrite your role, minimize your contribution, or push you out of something you earned through care and commitment, I hope you remember this. Volume isn't power. Preparation is. Patience is. And truth, when documented properly, doesn't need to shout. It just needs the right moment. As for the house, it's still quiet at night. The clock still ticks. The windows still let in that fresh thinking air Grandma loved so much. Sometimes I sit in her chair and imagine her nodding at the outcome. Not smug, not surprised, just certain. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel like the quiet one in the background of someone else's story. I feel rooted, grounded, unmoved. Did this hit close to home for you? If it did, let me know. Share your thoughts. If you've ever had to stand your ground quietly while someone underestimated you, I'd love to hear about it. Click Hype to help this story reach someone who needs the reminder. Your support means more than you think.